In the autumn of 1590, a small fleet of ships anchored off the coast of North Carolina, their hulls creaking with the weight of a forgotten story. The air was thick with salt, and the ghosts of unspoken fears as a group of English colonists, once hopeful and resolute, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a single word carved into a tree: Croatoan. The site, now a windswept expanse of dunes and pine, holds the skeletal remains of a fort, its stones bleached by time, its walls silent. No bodies, no signs of violence, just the echo of a desperate farewell, etched into bark by a hand that vanished with the rest. The Roanoke colony, born from the ambitions of Sir Walter Raleigh and the dreams of 117 men, women and children, became a phantom in the annals of history. Their tools lay abandoned, their children's toys scattered like forgotten relics. Did they walk into the night, guided by the flicker of a distant fire? Did they perish in a storm, their voices swallowed by the Atlantic? Or did they become part of a darker, more enduring mystery, absorbed by the very land that once welcomed them? The answer lies buried in the soil, in the whispers of the Croatoan people, and in the shadows of a history that refuses to be forgotten. If the silence of Roanoke keeps you searching, subscribe. This is only the beginning. The year is 1585. The air is thick with salt and the briny tang of the Atlantic, the wind a restless thing that howls through the rigging of the ships as they approach the shores of Roanoke Island. This is no ordinary landing. It's the first English expedition under Sir Walter Raleigh, a venture backed by the crown and fueled by the fevered dreams of an empire. The settlers, a ragtag collection of adventurers, craftsmen and soldiers, disembark onto the island's shores, their boots sinking into the damp, leaf-strewn earth. But the land they've chosen is not empty. It belongs to the Croatoan, a Native American tribe whose ancestors have lived here for centuries, their presence etched into the landscape in ways the English cannot yet comprehend. The Croatoan watch from the trees, their eyes sharp, their bodies coiled like springs. They have seen the Spanish before, and the scars of that violence still linger in the soil. To them, these pale strangers are another wave of invaders, another threat to their way of life. The settlers, led by the ambitious Sir Richard Grenville, do not understand the unspoken warning in the Croatoan silence. They build a fort, wooden palisades, thatched roofs, a crude attempt to impose order on a land that has never known it. But the Croatoan retreat, vanishing into the forests like ghosts, leaving the English to grapple with a reality they were never prepared for. The first winter is a butcher. The settlers, unaccustomed to the brutal cold and the relentless humidity of the Carolinas, fall ill in droves. Their supplies, meagre to begin with, are ravaged by insects and rot. The fort becomes a graveyard of half-finished tools and broken promises. John White, the governor, writes desperate letters to England, pleading for more supplies, more men, more hope. But the ocean is a cruel messenger, and the replies never come. By the time the relief ships arrive in 1586, the fort is abandoned, not by the English, but by the Croatoan who have vanished, leaving behind only the skeletal remains of the settlers' dream. What happened next is a tale of fire and blood. The Spanish, ever the predators, have caught wind of the English presence. A fleet arrives under the command of Captain Pedro Menendez de Avilés, a man whose reputation is built on the blood of heretics and the conquest of new lands. The attack is swift and merciless. The remaining English survivors are taken prisoner, their captors dragging them aboard ships bound for the Spanish Main. Among them is John White, who would later return to Roanoke in a desperate attempt to rescue his people. But the colony is gone, its ashes scattered by the tide. 3 years later, in 1587, the English return, not as conquerors but as settlers. This time they come with 117 souls, including the first English child born in the New World, Virginia Dare. The colony is a fragile thing, a fragile hope. The settlers build homes, plant crops, and for a time it seems as though the dream might take root. But the land is not so easily tamed. Disease strikes again, and the Croatoan, now wary but not entirely hostile, trade with the English in a fragile truce. Then in 1590, John White returns. His son, Governor John White, has been entrusted with the colony's fate, but when he arrives, the fort is empty. No bodies, no signs of violence, just the wind whispering through the trees, and carved into the bark of a tree the word Croatoan, etched in a hand that could belong to a child or a warrior. It is a message, but it is not a warning. It is a clue, a thread in the fabric of a mystery that would haunt generations. Modern archaeologists have combed the site, their hands sinking into the soil, their instruments mapping the remnants of the fort. They found fragments of pottery, the rusted remains of tools, and the faint outlines of structures buried beneath centuries of growth. The land has claimed much, but it has not erased everything. Ground-penetrating radar reveals the shape of foundations, the ghostly outlines of homes that once stood. Soil samples show traces of corn and tobacco, evidence that the settlers did more than survive, they tried to thrive. But the question remains, what became of them, the Croatoan, the Spanish, the sea, the forest? The answer lies not in the bones, but in the silence, in the way the land holds its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. And as the wind shifts over Roanoke Island, it carries with it the echoes of a past that refuses to be forgotten. The air on Roanoke Island is thick with the scent of salt and pine, a humid breath that clings to the skin and muffles sound. It's here, in this tangled maze of cypress and oak, that the Croatoan once walked, a people whose presence was as fleeting as the mist that rolls in from the sound. They were the first to meet the English, the ones who traded deer hides for iron tools, who taught the settlers how to fish in the shallows and how to avoid the venomous snakes that slithered through the undergrowth. When the first English party arrived in 1585, they were not met with spears or war cries, but with a wary curiosity. The Croatoan, led by their chief Manteo, saw in these pale-skinned strangers a chance to forge an alliance, one that would later be shattered by the weight of land, hunger and blood. The settlers, desperate and outnumbered, relied on the Croatoan for survival. Without them, the English would have starved. But survival is a fragile thing, and the Croatoan's generosity was not without cost. As the years passed, the settlers began to claim the land, not as partners but as conquerors. They built forts, cleared forests, and demanded tribute in the form of food and labour. The Croatoan, once allies, grew uneasy. Their world was not one of fences and titles. It was a web of kinship and reciprocity. When the English began to hoard resources, when they spoke of the crown and of distant cities where gold flowed like rivers, the Croatoan saw not salvation, but a slow unravelling of their way of life. By 1590, the Croatoan had vanished. Not a single trace of them remained, no fire pits, no arrowheads, no footprints in the mud, only whispers. Other tribes, like the Secotan and the Pamlico, spoke of them in hushed tones, as if invoking their name might summon something unspoken. But the settlers left behind a clue. The word Croatoan carved into a tree, deep and deliberate, as if the last breath of a dying man had been chiselled into the bark. It was not a warning. It was a name, a direction, a plea. Archaeologists have scoured the island for decades, their brushes and trowels uncovering fragments of a story that refuses to be told. At the site of the original fort where the settlers once gathered to drink weak tea and argue over maps, the soil is heavy with history. Layers of earth reveal the remnants of a struggle, musket balls embedded in the ground, shards of ceramic that once held broth, and the faint outlines of post holes where homes once stood. But the Croatoan. Their presence is a ghost. Metal detectorists have combed the dunes, their machines whirring like insects, searching for anything that might link the settlers to the vanished tribe. What they've found is tantalizing but elusive. A single iron nail, its surface pitted with rust, a piece of a clay pipe, its stem cracked but still bearing the marks of teeth. These are not the remains of a massacre, but of something more subtle, a blending, a merging of two worlds. Some researchers believe the settlers followed the Croatoan inland, into the swamps and forests where the tribe had always thrived. There they might have been absorbed, their English tongues lost to the cadence of native speech. Others argue that the settlers were killed, their bones scattered by the very people who had once saved them. But the evidence, it's a mosaic of contradictions. Soil samples from the interior of the island show traces of European crops, wheat, barley, but also the pollen of native plants, as if two ecosystems had been forced to coexist. The word Croatoan still haunts the island. It's been found in multiple places, carved into different trees as if the settlers were marking their path or their desperation. Could it have been a signal, a message to the outside world, or was it a final act of defiance, a way of saying, we are here and we are not gone? The truth remains buried, not in the ground but in the silence between the trees. The Croatoan's ghost lingers not as a spectre but as a question, one that the land holds and that the wind carries low and steady across the waves. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the kind of silence that presses against your ears like a held breath. You're standing where the fort once stood, now a skeletal outline of posts and rotting timber, swallowed by the forest's relentless advance. The trees here are ancient, their roots clawing through the remnants of civilization, as if the land itself is trying to erase the colony's existence. But the land lies, it remembers. You can feel it in the way the shadows cling to the ground, in the way the wind whispers through the branches like a chorus of voices, speaking in a language you almost understand. John White's return in 1590 was the moment the world turned its back on Roanoke. The governor had spent years in England, desperate to secure supplies to rescue his daughter Dorothy, who had remained behind with the settlers. When he finally sailed back across the Atlantic, the sea was no longer a bridge but a tomb. The fort was gone, not destroyed but abandoned. The palisades stood hollow, the tools scattered like discarded bones. The settlers were nowhere. Only the carvings remained. Croatoan etched into bark with a knife's edge and crow, half finished, as if the chisel had slipped or the hand had faltered. You kneel, fingers brushing the grooves in the wood. The carving is precise, deliberate, not a random act of desperation but a message. But to whom? To the Croatoan, to the Spanish, to the ghosts of the settlers themselves. Theories swirl like smoke, but the evidence is a mosaic of contradictions. Archaeologists have combed the site for decades, unearthing fragments of pottery, rusted nails, and a single child's toy, a carved wooden horse, its paint flaked but still clinging to the grain. It's a relic of innocence, a reminder of the settlers' lives before the hunger set in. The fort's final days must have been a slow unravelling. Supplies dwindled and the settlers' letters to England, those few that survived the stormy seas, describe a colony on the brink. We have no bread, one reads, no meat, no drink. The earth yields nothing but roots and stones. The settlers were not just starving, they were terrified. The Croatoan, once allies, had grown wary. The Spanish, ever watchful, had their own eyes on the new world. And then there was the disease, something unseen, something that could have swept through the camp like a shadow. But the most unsettling theory is the one that haunts the trees, that the settlers didn't die, didn't flee, but disappeared. Not into the sea or the jungle, but into the very fabric of the land. The Croatoan had a word for it: hollowing, the act of becoming part of the forest, of vanishing into the wilderness until you are no longer human but something else. The settlers may have tried to walk into the interior to find a new place, but the land swallowed them. You follow the trail the archaeologists mapped, a series of faint depressions in the soil where footprints might have lingered. The ground is uneven, pitted with the remnants of fires, charred wood, scorched stones. It's as if the settlers tried to build something to start over, but the effort was half finished. A few posts lie broken, their ends splintered as if struck by something heavy. A defensive line, a failed attempt to protect themselves from something unseen. Theories multiply like weeds. Could the settlers have been taken by the Spanish? The records are silent, but the absence of evidence is itself a clue. The Spanish had no interest in Roanoke, their eyes fixed on Florida and Mexico. The disease theory is stronger: smallpox, typhoid, something that could have spread through the colony like wildfire. But where are the bodies, the bones? The forest is littered with remains, but nothing that points to a massacre. And then there's the silence. The settlers left no final scream, no last stand, they simply vanished. The carvings, the scattered tools, the child's toy, these are the only things they left behind. You can almost hear their footsteps, the creak of their boots on the forest floor, the whispers of their voices as they disappeared into the trees. But the forest is a fickle keeper of secrets. It gives nothing back. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of salt and pine. You stand, brushing the dirt from your hands, and look out over the island. The trees are still, the water still. But you know the truth, the settlers are not gone. They are here in the soil, in the roots, in the silence. And the land remembers. The wind here is different. It's not just wind, it's the breath of something ancient, something that has watched the land shift and crumble over centuries. You can feel it in your bones, in the way it tugs at the sleeves of your coat, the way it carries the scent of decay and salt of something long buried. The trees are older than the colony. They've seen the settlers come and go, or so they claim. But the truth is a labyrinth. And you're standing at its entrance, with nothing but a compass, a notebook, and the weight of a mystery that has outlasted empires. Let's start with the Croatoan. The word carved into that tree, Croatoan, wasn't just a message. It was a map, a beacon, a final plea. But what does it mean? The theory is simple: the settlers didn't vanish. They walked. They left the island, crossed the Sound, and found refuge with the Croatoan, a neighbouring Algonquian tribe. It's a theory that's been whispered for centuries, but it's also been dissected, prodded, and questioned. The Croatoan, after all, weren't strangers to the English. They'd traded with them, shared food, even fought alongside them against the Spanish. But they were also wary. The English had arrived with promises, but also with hunger, with disease, with a hunger for land that never seemed to stop. So here's the thing: the Croatoan didn't leave behind a trail. No artifacts, no bones, no markings that suggest a sudden influx of settlers. Their own oral histories speak of a time when the island was empty, when the sea was calm, when the forest was quiet. But they also speak of a people who came, who brought metal and fire, who vanished like mist. The word on the tree, it could be a sign, but it could also be a lie. a trick, a warning, or a prayer. Then there's the Spanish. The idea that the settlers were taken by Spanish raiders is a theory that clings to the edges of history like a shadow. The Spanish were here in the late 16th century, their ships prowling the Carolinas, their ambitions as vast as the Atlantic. They'd captured English ships before, enslaved sailors, burned settlements to the ground. But here's the rub: no Spanish records mention Roanoke. Not a single document, not a letter, not a line in a report. The Spanish didn't leave evidence, they left silence, and silence is the hardest thing to prove. Wait, there's another theory. The settlers didn't run, they didn't fight, they built something new somewhere else. A mainland settlement hidden in the marshes or the hills, swallowed by time. This is the theory that haunts archaeologists. They've scoured the coast, dug through the mud, scanned the soil with ground-penetrating radar, looking for the ghost of a palisade, the remains of a well, the faintest trace of a hearth. But the land is stubborn. It gives nothing back. No nails, no pottery shards, no skeletal remains. Just dirt and the faint echo of something that was. And then there's the most brutal theory of all, that the settlers died. Not by violence, not by capture, but by hunger, by thirst, by the slow, suffocating collapse of a society that couldn't survive the elements. The evidence? Well, there's very little. No mass grave, no signs of disease, no signs of a sudden catastrophe. But here's what they did find: a few scattered artifacts, fragments of English ceramics, a single iron nail buried 6 inches deep in the soil. Nothing that screams death. Nothing that screams disaster, just a whisper, a question. You can almost hear them, the settlers, in the silence. The women grinding grain, the children playing by the shore, the men sharpening their axes, staring out at the sea. They were here, they were real, and yet they are gone. But the land remembers. The trees, the rocks, the waves, they hold their stories. And you're just a visitor, a listener, a seeker. You're not here to solve the mystery, you're here to feel it. To stand in the wind, to listen to the trees, to let the silence speak. Because the truth is this: the settlers didn't vanish. They became part of the land, part of the roots, the soil, the salt. And the land, it doesn't forget, it holds on. And one day maybe it will let go. The wind off the Pamlico Sound carries the brine of the Atlantic, sharp and unrelenting, as if the sea itself is whispering secrets to the dunes. Here, on the brittle bones of Roanoke Island, the ruins of the first English fort lie half buried in the sand, their stone walls worn smooth by time and tide. The air is thick with the scent of salt and decay, the kind that clings to your skin and makes your throat ache. You can almost hear the settlers' voices, fractured and fading, echoing through the hollowed-out remains of their world. But the truth is, they're not here anymore, not in the way you'd expect. They're in the blood of the people who walk these shores now, in the DNA of the Lumbee, the Hatterers, the Corey, and in the tangled roots of the magnolia trees that have grown up around the fort's crumbling foundations. Scientists have spent decades combing the genetic code of coastal tribes, peeling back layers of history like pages from a tattered ledger. They look for markers, specific sequences in mitochondrial DNA that might trace back to 16th century England. The work is meticulous, almost ritualistic. Swabs taken from the inside of a cheek, samples preserved in ethanol, data fed into algorithms that compare genetic profiles across continents. Dr. Sarah Bristow, a geneticist at UNC, once told me that the search is like hunting for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is made of centuries and the needle is a story. She's found fragments, hints of a connection, but nothing conclusive. We're looking for a signal that might not even exist, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The settlers could have intermarried, their genes diluted beyond recognition. Or maybe they never left the island at all, their presence erased by time. But there's another layer to this: the artifacts. Beneath the dunes, archaeologists have uncovered shards of English pottery, bits of iron tools, and the telltale blue glass of European origin, buried beside Native American ceramics and arrowheads. It's a silent conversation between two worlds, a palimpsest of contact and conflict. In 1998, a team led by Dr. William Kelso excavated a site near the fort and found a cache of objects that suggested the settlers didn't vanish in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they lingered, their lives intertwined with the Croatan. A child's toy, a rusted nail, a piece of a carved wooden spoon, objects that hint at a slow, uneasy coexistence. They weren't just survivors, Kelso said in a documentary. They were trying to build something new, even as the land around them was changing. And yet the mystery persists. The word Croatoan etched into the tree near the fort is the only clue the settlers left behind, a cryptic message that has fueled centuries of speculation. Some believe it was a signal to the Croatan tribe, a plea for help or a warning of danger. Others think it was a simple marker, a way for the settlers to indicate where they were heading. But no one knows for sure. The Croatan themselves, long assimilated into the broader Lumbee community, have no written records of what happened to the English. Their oral histories speak of alliances, of shared meals, of a time when the two groups were bound by necessity. But they also speak of fear, the fear of a foreign power, of diseases that swept through their villages, of the English men who came with guns and promises. Theories abound, of course. Some say the settlers were killed in a massacre, their bodies lost to the tides. Others argue they fled inland, joining other tribes and fading into obscurity. There's even a fringe theory that they sailed south, following the coast to the Carolinas or beyond, leaving Roanoke behind like a ghost. But what's most unsettling is the possibility that the answer lies not in the past, but in the present, in the blood of those who live here now. You can almost feel it, the weight of that possibility. The land doesn't forget, but neither does it always reveal its secrets. And maybe that's why the story of Roanoke endures, not because we'll ever find the final answer, but because the mystery itself is a kind of monument. A reminder that history is never just a collection of facts. It's a living thing, breathing in the soil, in the DNA, in the wind that still howls across the island. And as long as people keep looking, the settlers will never be truly lost. The sun dips low, bleeding orange across the Atlantic, casting long shadows over the dunes where the settlers once walked. The wind here is a thing alive, whispering through the pines, tugging at the edges of your coat, carrying the scent of salt and something older, something buried. You can almost hear them, footsteps in the sand, the rasp of a blade, the distant wail of a child. But the island keeps its secrets tight. The word Croatoan carved into a tree, etched into history, still haunts the soil. What did it mean? A warning, a plea, a name? Modern DNA tests have found traces of European ancestry in Native American tribes, faint echoes of interwoven bloodlines, but the story remains tangled. Did the settlers vanish into the woods, assimilated by the Croatoan? Did they sail away, leaving no trace? Or did they die, their bones bleached by time, waiting for someone to listen? Theories swirl like fog: starvation, mutiny, disease, even a curse. But the truth? It's buried deeper than any grave. As the tide rolls in, swallowing the footprints of the past, the island holds its breath. The final chapter, it's not written yet. What do you think happened?